Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Help Me Understand. My name is Thomas Jeffrey. I'm here with Stan McKinney, who is the chair of the Mass Communication Department at Campbellsville University. Hi, Stan.
Thomas, it's a pleasure.
Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
I can. I'm a graduate of Murray State University with both a bachelor's and master's degree in journalism. I worked at the Sturgis News in far western Kentucky. I've also worked at the Sentinel News in Shelbyville, and I was news editor of the Central Kentucky News Journal here in town for a little over 20 years. I've been a full-time professor here at the university my 23rd year.
And you won a few awards along the way.
I've won a few along the ways. I've been lucky enough to do so from the Kentucky Press Association as well as the Society of Professional Journalists. Yeah, I've been very lucky.
Even here at Campbellsville, you've gotten the Distinguished Professor Award.
Yes.
So congratulations on that. Well done.
Thank you.
So how long have you been in the business? You said you were like in the field for 20 years,
right,
I guess.
Quite some time. I've had a full-time job for 48 years. So combine my journalism experience with my experience here at the university, 48 years, and I'm only 30 years old. So
yeah, started young, did you?
Started very young, yes.
So the topic that we're going to be topics today are going to be that of journalism and also free speech. So I want to address those one at a time.
Okay.
And in particular, starting with journalism, what is journalism? Help me understand journalism.
I can give you a very short definition or a very long definition. Let me give you a short one. Journalism is truth. It's trying to report the truth to the public so that they can make informed decisions. Journalism is not an easy job. I think it takes somebody who cares about people, who cares about right and wrong. It's trying to keep government accountable, transparency, so that we know not only what government's doing for us, but also what government is doing to us. It's not for everybody. I do think it's a calling, and I'm very proud that we have a very good journalism program here. It's something we're always going to need. Journalism has changed. There's no question about that. The media may change, but I think the need for news that we can trust will remain with us always. Trust is a very important part of it. Any journalist worth their salt has to be believable, and that's one of the issues I think we face today. It's easy to blame it on social media, but I think we've also got to take a look at the audience also. We've got to look at things skeptically. You know, we've got to look at a variety of sources. We've got to use good old common sense, which a lot of people don't want to use anymore. You know, when I make a decision on almost anything, whether it's to buy a vehicle, buy a television set, you know, whatever it may be, I do the research. Some of it's contradictory. We were talking earlier that, you know, I'm now drawing Social Security. I had to do a lot of research on that, and some of the so-called experts I found are not as expert, perhaps, as they should be. So we as members of the audience, as consumers of information, we have a responsibility to seek out information, and I think from more than one source.
You said in the beginning that it's about truth.
Yes.
Help me understand truth, like from a perspective of journalism. What is truth?
I've been trying to figure out what truth is now for 69 years, and that's how old I am, if you will. Each of us could look at the same thing and come away with a different opinion of what happened. And that's why I think journalists have to present what happens in front of them, and they have to accurately quote people. They have to leave off the opinion. Then we as readers have to look at that, decide if we believe it or not. I generally don't like tape recorders, but in recent years I've kind of relented on that because I've had people tell me, I didn't say that. Oh, yes, you did. If you have a tape recording, you can prove, yes, you said it. But then again, sometimes we may say something thinking we've said something else too, so that happens too. It does. Truth is one of those things I think that we as human beings have an obligation to constantly seek. Will we ever find it? You know, I could get very philosophical here. Will we ever find true peace, true harmony, you know, all of that? I don't know. Truth is our goal. Will we ever obtain it? I hope so, but we may not.
Yeah. Well, as you're speaking, the idea of truth seems like there has to be a context in which it's presented.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And
right.
So the difference, I guess, being objective truth, the things that I believe are true.
Right.
And the objective truth of this is what occurred. These are the events. Does that make sense?
It's difficult. It does. And none of us are without bias.
Yeah.
We're just not. And it's difficult to put that bias aside sometime. There may be somebody you don't trust for whatever reason, political affiliation, whatever it may be, you just don't trust them. That doesn't mean they never tell the truth. You know, we have to be open to that, and it's difficult to do. We have to have an open mind. A lot of the people over the last several hundred years who have argued for freedom of speech, who have argued for free expression, they believe that we were rational human beings, that we would use logic and reason to come to a final conclusion. I would raise the question, though, are we logical human beings? Do we sometimes rely on pure logic, pure instinct to make decisions? Do we rely on what our mother and father told us many years ago, which may have been true, may not have been true? You know, I've seen a lot of things in my 69 years. I remember when schools were integrated. Prior to that, everybody thought, you know, we should separate the races. I remember seeing water fountains in the courthouse that were for colored only. Obviously, all that's wrong, but at one time people believed that was right. Separate but equal. That's wrong. It's just plain wrong. So we have to put aside those things, and we have to constantly, I think, seek to improve ourselves and to keep that open mind. It's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would like to come back to the thinking logically or being rational thinkers. But one of the questions I have about journalism in particular, as a whole, as a discipline, if you will,
right,
is how does that affect society? Like, what maybe a lot of people might be asking, so what good is journalism now? We have, you know, is anybody really presenting facts or truth,
right,
or just their subjective view?
Well, there's a lot of garbage out there. There's no question about that. But you take away freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and we no longer have a democracy. We just don't. We just soon put up the Nazi flag.
Why do you say that?
Well, we're supposed to make informed decisions. We're supposed to vote and elect the people who represent us. It is the duty of the press to provide the information to the public to make wise decisions, and then it's up to the people to actually look at that information and make wise, informed decisions. I have never voted just for the party. Never done that. I've tried to analyze, you know, who the best candidate is. Not everyone does that. I understand that. I used to try to argue politics with my father. My father's basic principle was if he was a member of this party, he'd be the right kind of candidate. It's hard to argue with that. It really is. But take away a free press, take away freedom of speech, you do have I can't say that word, authoritarian state.
Yeah.
That's a better word. There you go. Government, if they can take over the press and eliminate free speech, God help us for what they can do.
And there are a lot of instances of that.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, throughout
one of the first
history.
things the dictator does is shut down the press.
Yeah. Well, even in ancient times, I guess the barker, as they
Sure.
the town
Sure.
crier, they would give
Right.
the message that was official,
Right.
coming from the powers that be.
It gets back to the divine right of kings, where they truly believed that God put them on earth and they were wise and nobody else was. The individual was not considered
There's still
important
some of
at
those
all.
sitting around.
You said that.
We won't mention
get
any
into that,
names,
but
right,
yes, I mean, but in other countries there are.
Yeah.
There certainly are. The people are considered worthless. They're valuable only as to how they can serve those in government, those in power. Yeah. The pyramids could not have been built without slave labor. Couldn't have been, unless you believe aliens did it, and that's another matter altogether.
We'll have you back on another. We'll talk about that.
Okay, I can talk about aliens. I actually believe aliens exist, but I've not seen one, so don't tell anybody I've seen one.
So you don't have proof, but...
I do not have proof, but it just doesn't make sense that there are millions of stars out there and God only put us on this one little planet. No, doesn't.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that do have that opinion as well.
Yeah.
One of the things that, coming back to the rational thinking, and that's, there's almost a responsibility, if I understood what you said right, on every citizen.
Sure.
To be a rational thinker, if indeed, I mean, because what I sort of understood you to say is you have to do the research, you have to think about things that are being presented, and then make an informed decision or the best possible decision
right.
in your estimation.
Absolutely.
Based on that. That sounds like a lot of work.
It is, and that's perhaps why a lot of people don't do that. We are lazy. Being rational requires you to actually put forth the effort and to investigate things, and some of us don't want to do the work. We just want to, I'll say Dr. Jeffrey is the wisest man I've ever said. Anything he says is true.
You would be the first.
Right, so if I have a question, I'll call you, and whatever you tell me, I'll do. We are lazy.
Well, my car's awful dirty. I wish that would.
Okay, there you go.
But I get your point, and I fall into the category too, because in an era where, so growing up, and I tell my students this, and they don't even understand the context, but growing up, we got two channels depending on which way you turned the antenna outside.
I'm right there with you, yes.
And so at any given time, you were only able to look at one or the other.
Yes.
Now it's almost, I don't do any of the news notifications, because otherwise I would be.
Yeah, it's information overload.
Yeah,
there's more information than we can possibly take in. That is a problem. But I think relying on just one channel or one newspaper or one person to tell you everything, that's not good. You need to seek people whose views are different from yours. You need to be open. I don't think anybody's 100% right about everything. My wife tells me that I think I'm 100% right about everything, but I know I'm not, okay? I even know there are better cars out there than Mustangs, okay?
Wow. Did we get that on tape?
You've got it on tape. But it also proves another point. We tend to believe things, and we're very resistant to accepting something that differs from what we already believe, even if it smacks us in the face. COVID is a great example of that. Yeah. I firmly believe COVID exists. I've been immunized, the whole bit. I know people who thought COVID was not real. They believed all the negative stuff that's all over Facebook. One of them almost died from COVID. So, do you believe the scientists who've spent their entire lifetime studying this stuff, or some guy who posted something on Facebook?
Well, in defense of the other side, there are also scientists and researchers who, not that COVID doesn't exist, but some of the other issues around it. And of course, this isn't, but it is a good segue for me to ask, can you think of some great examples of journalism, like for folks who are not really, and especially in this time of so much journalism, can you think of even maybe some recent examples of that was good journalism, and from your perspective of fact, truth-based, building trust?
Okay. Well, you really want to put me on the spot, don't you? Some recent, really good journalism.
Okay, well,
I could go back a few years.
Go back a few years
maybe,
if you need to.
I think the Pentagon Papers case is an example of really, really good journalism. Now, the government went to court to try to block publication of the Pentagon Papers. And for anyone who doesn't know what the Pentagon Papers was about, it was a multi-year study by the government of the war in Vietnam. The conclusion was we could never win the war in Vietnam. But we didn't end it. We kept on going and going and going, and young people were dying. This was released by a whistleblower to the New York Times. The government found out they were planning to publish it, sought an injunction. Meanwhile, the Washington Post gets the same stuff, and they have to decide, do we publish it or not, since a pending, court hearing is going to be held by the Supreme Court. Ultimately, they both published it. The government really could only prove that it would embarrass them. But did the public need to know that the government was having us fight a war they knew we couldn't win? I think we deserve to know that. And had my child died in that war and the government knew years before we couldn't win it? Government's not perfect. It's government supposed to be of the people, by the people, and for the people. I think there are too many people in government who think they are there just to put money in their pockets. I really believe that.
Well, you have to ask the question based on what you just said. So why would we be there? If they know we can't win, what's the end game? And that would be good for us to know, because maybe we would buy into it.
Right.
Maybe it is something worthy of staying, or if it's just making more money for them.
I'm sure there are many companies that made a lot of money. Plus, the reason I've read over and over and over again from various sources is no president wanted to be the first president to lose a war. Is it better to be embarrassed or have young men die? We have to keep government straight, and that's one of the main reasons I think the press exists. The press is often referred to as the fourth branch of government, to keep an eye on what all the other governments do. Even locally, if we had no press here to attend public meetings, I trust most of these people. I'm even a public official myself. But would they be tempted to maybe slip something in if they knew the public would never know about it? We need to know what's going on. We need to know what these people pay themselves. We need to know where the money's going.
Well, we're funding this, right?
Right.
I mean,
it's our money.
Not only is it our democracy from that standpoint, we're funding all of this.
They spend our money.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we have a right and a need to know that.
And journalism is a way to make that possible,
Absolutely.
to inform.
Sure.
And
inform the public.
When I think of journalism, that's what I think of.
Right. And that's what it's
informing
supposed to be.
And I want that trust. I feel a little untrusting these days.
Now, are all journalists trustworthy? Are all journalists trustworthy? Well, I don't even know what I said. Can you trust all journalists? No. Can you trust everybody in every profession?
Right.
No. I could tell you some horror stories about some other professions. I won't do that, but there are journalists who lie.
Can you tell us a horror story about journalism?
Yeah, there are plenty of them. And you're going to ask me to remember his name, aren't you? The reporter for the New York Times who made up all of his stories.
Right, that was what, 5 years ago?
And it's been actually longer than that.
Has it been?
Oh, gosh.
I know who you're talking about.
His name escapes me. To come to me eventually.
But the basis of it was that he just made
it up. And
that wasn't the plagiarism case, though, was it?
Well,
seemed like there was one.
I can't believe I can't think of his name, but I cannot. He just made his stuff up. They wanted to believe he was a good writer. Problem is, most of this stuff just simply wasn't true. They started suspecting that his stories were false. They even talked to one of his sources. He never talked to me, but I just figured that's the way all journalists work. And then there's the case in Atlanta of, what got his first name? Boy, I should have made more notes. The Atlanta bombing, the security guard who found the bomb. His first name's Richard.
Right, there was a documentary or something about it, wasn't it?
There was a movie about it as well as a documentary. The FBI, everybody's under pressure, to find a suspect. He's first a hero, then they decided he's a loser. He's this loner who wants to be a hero. He did it just to make himself a hero. He was innocent. He was completely innocent. The press ruined his life. There's no question about that. Major net
press in this case is plural. This isn't just one
plural.
bad actor.
Plural.
It was,
CNN, CBS, NBC, a lot of the major networks settled with him out of court. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution would not settle, and in recent years, just a couple years ago, the courts did decide they did nothing wrong because they only reported what the FBI told them. So, ruined the guy's life, but they only reported what they were told by the FBI. So the FBI ruined his life, if you want to get right down to it. The press was the medium.
But using that tool, Richard Jewell, that's
Jewell.
right, yeah.
Well,
let's...
You got to be careful as a journalist, you know. Yeah. There's the old saying, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. There's some truth to that. How many mothers?
But isn't that a journalistic? And I don't know. This is your discipline, but it would seem like that would be one of your principles: is verify.
Absolutely, verify, verify, verify. There have been mothers who've killed their kids. You've got to verify sometimes the very simple things. Some of my students several years ago did stories about World War II veterans and Korean veterans in the community. They mentioned places they had stayed during the war. Well, I wanted to check them out. Not that I believe these guys lied, but memories change. You know, memories become foggy over years, and maybe even the names of places change. So yeah, you want to verify. You've got to verify. Very important.
So how has journalism changed? And I know that even my own experience, and you get to be a certain age and everything had changed around the year 2000.
Right.
But how has it changed in some of the major ways that?
It's changed. It's just unbelievable. Really has changed. When I was in college, the newspaper was the thing, and radio to a certain extent, and also television. But we were talking earlier. When I was growing up, we had 2 channels I could get. Third one if the weather was just right, and I'd stand outside and wave my hands or something.
Tin foil on your head.
Right. Yeah. But now how many channels do we get? I couldn't even tell you how many channels come into my home. And then we can stream all kinds of stuff, news over the internet. There are literally thousands of sources. Are they all vetted? No. Anybody who has access to the internet can post anything they want to. That's something we have to contend with. A lot of people tend to not read newspapers too, but a lot of people tend not to even read today. Do they read books? And if they read anything on the internet, is it something that long? Right. Do they read anything in depth?
Let me read the headline, and
that's about it.
Yeah.
And you can't always get everything by doing that. We have more information available today at our fingertips than ever in the history of this world. Are we smarter? I would suggest we're not. We are basically lazy. We just are. And I mentioned I just saw a documentary about, I've seen several documentaries recently about Tammy Faye Baker. Is it 100% true? I have no idea. Right. I really don't. Has it been dramatized? I saw one, it's called Spencer. It's about Lady Diana. Was it dramatized? Now, if you get all your information about those people strictly from those movies, I'm going to suggest you don't have the complete story. Yeah. You just don't. Lots of competition. The main competition is for advertising revenue. The media is a business. It does have to make money because people who work there love to be paid. That's a nice little fringe benefit of working, is to be paid. So it's changed. I think the basic concept of news hasn't changed. The medium's changed. Yeah. I'm not even going to try to predict 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now what it would be. Who knows?
You're also a photojournalist, and I think that's changed a bit too.
It has changed. There's no question about that. Now, I'm not going to tell you that people haven't been manipulating photographs since photography began. Right. They have been, but it was more difficult when you were shooting from film, from negatives. Using the digital darkroom, using programs like Adobe Photoshop, you can create images that never existed. I could pull up an image here on the same computer. I go over here, copy this part, paste it over there, and if I spend enough time, you can never tell that is a fake image. So fake images, not hard to do. I love photojournalism. I love the visual image. The visual image can be extremely powerful. There's some images in my mind that I will never forget. But it is, for somebody who's unscrupulous, it's easy today to fake something. That's why we worked ethics into our program several years ago.
Well, sometimes you don't even have to fake. I mean, I've seen instances of just the right angle or the right crop makes all the difference in the world.
That's true. A wide-angle lens, for example, will make things stretch them out a little bit depending on how close you are to the camera. That will. The distortion is indeed possible, but it's even greater possibility today, though, to fake an image than ever. Yeah. We just have to depend on people to tell us the truth. You know, we keep coming back to the truth. Back to the truth, exactly.
So thinking back, and if you were to start all over again, right, the young Stan, but you know that whole thing. If I knew then what I know now, what would you tell yourself? What would you say? You know what, this is a. Did you have the same ideas about truth, and when you went into journalism, I don't want to say you're idealizing it more than just being responsible, you know, or.
I think responsibility is the key. You know, that's a good question. If I'm honest, the reason I went into journalism is because I hated calculus. That's true. I was going to be a chemist. And I cannot today imagine anything more boring than working in a lab, you know, 8 hours a day for whatever.
Crunching the numbers and...
Right, exactly. Journalism, you work with people, you tell their stories, and I think there's something noble about that. You know, feature stories, telling the story about somebody who's overcome, you know, an adversary or battled a horrible disease and won out, you know, things like that. That's the kind of thing that I think really makes it worth it. But that part about government, it will never go away. As long as government exists, you've got to have a free press to challenge them. You've got to. Did I feel that way when I first started out? No, it took time to develop that. I think a lot of people, if they actually went to some public meetings, they might be surprised. I really think they might. One of the reasons that I ran for public office was I saw a whole lot of things happen in public meetings.
While you're covering it.
While I'm covering it.
You're seeing things going
on.
on.
And I could not run when I worked for the media because it was a conflict of interest. But I saw a lot of things that just frankly disgusted me. It was clear what had to be done, but nobody would do it because they were more concerned about whether or not they'd get reelected than doing what the right thing is. And I think that's something the press has to point out. After Fruit of the Loom closed here, unemployment, and then Batesville casket, unemployment soared. We had to do something. We had to have an industrial recruiter. Well, we didn't have the money to hire an industrial recruiter, so what do? We had to pass an occupational tax. The people who were working contributed part of their money so we could recruit new industries, hire the people who are not working, and maybe even create better jobs for those people. Nobody wanted to do it. I can't raise taxes. I can't raise taxes. Doesn't matter that your roads are falling apart. Doesn't matter you don't have enough police officers. Doesn't matter we don't have industries. I can't raise taxes. I can't raise taxes. That's what we had to do. Unpopular? Yes. Necessary? Yes. They didn't want to do it. I'm going to suggest that if you are a public official and you're trying to do only what will get you reelected, you need to resign from office immediately. I would suggest that.
So just to juxtapose a couple of things here, one of the things you love about journalism is the story.
Yes, absolutely.
That, you know, as you're covering something, someone or some event and making that connection.
Right.
An emotional connection and,
sure.
You know,
sure.
Which I think really comes out in pieces that you could tell. As a, you know, we'll get into opinion pieces in a minute, but juxtaposed to a sort of creating a transparency for people and holding government accountable.
That's the whole point.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so, from what I hear you saying, a journalist can needs to maybe not do both, but those seem to be some of the primary reasons. Am I here?
Yes,
Like, do it
absolutely.
because you love it, but maybe you like the stories, but cover them, be truthful about them, bring out, elicit that emotion.
Right.
But covering government's a little different. I mean, there's lots of emotions involved.
There's lots. It's adversarial. There's no question about that.
And what is the truth? Just ask any of the people on either
What is
side.
the truth? They can have different opinions, then they may all be legitimate. That's why, again, as a consumer of this information, you've got to seek various sources and then kind of decide for yourself. But then realize that we are biased too. It's difficult. I'm not going to tell you it's not difficult. It is difficult.
Tone that down enough to like get
Right.
that truth, those facts
Right.
out. It sounds like a lot of going back to hard work. It sounds like
It is hard work, and it's not 9 to 5 either.
Yeah.
Far from it. And when does news happen? 24/7. Weekends, a lot of inconvenient times, Christmas, whenever. Yeah, it's a calling. I think it really is a calling. But I think if you love people, if you care about this country, if you care about democracy, if you care about freedom and all of that, I don't think you could ask for a better job, other than maybe pay a little bit more. But, it really is a great job, I think, for the right person. You said talk about, about telling people stories. I think the human side of it, whatever government does impacts people, and I love telling stories through people. Can you imagine if we truly understood people from all walks of life, really understood what it's like to be them? Could we come closer to actually living in peace? That may be dreaming, may be pie in the sky, but I think that's part of a journalist's role too.
Yeah. But shouldn't we? I mean, as citizens in a democracy, shouldn't we sort of dream for
I think we should.
I mean,
Right.
and it doesn't mean that we'll necessarily have, and we can't change it overnight.
No.
But to understand have a common goal, and that's why war seems to bring everybody together. And I don't mean to.
Right. It's for a common purpose.
Right.
Hopefully. World War II, I think, was easily justified. No question about that. We were fighting for a common purpose. I cannot imagine what would happen if the war had gone the other way. And there's actually a television series about that. I won't go into that. It's a good series. It's well done. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's something we've got to care about. If we to the point we just don't care, then it doesn't matter at all. I think there's something else that we've got to be well aware of too. We talk about news available on the internet and all that. A lot of people don't have smartphones. They don't have the latest computers. They can't stream all this information or whatever. There's some people that kind of get lost along the wayside. We've got to remember them. These Society of Professional Journalists, part of their ethics is to give voice to the voiceless. And that's what I think we have to do too, is recognize there are people out there who are underrepresented or not even represented. We have to be their champions. We have to stand up for them. And we have to say, wait a minute. I think it's a calling, and I think it's a noble calling. I really think it is.
Yeah. If I were to appoint you, or not me, but somebody with some real money, make it worth doing.
Okay.
Or just be able to appeal to your better side, to create a sort of mandatory journalism literacy course, something that you had to take.
Right.
Sort of like getting a driver's license or something. You got to study a little bit for it.
Right.
So, what would you include? Just some of the. What do you think would be most important for individuals who don't really understand, some of the things that you do, not journalism in the way you do, but to help them understand how to actually consume the product from journalism?
I think such a course probably is necessary. My big question would be, what grade level, where do you put it?
Well, they used to say you do things at the 6th grade level.
Okay.
Like
And that may be where you
felt
put it. But I think we need basic life skills too. Cooking, sewing, taking care of your car and all that.
Before you read the news, you have to be able to clean your room.
I think we need all of that. How many people are we turning out into society that can't do base? You know, you're offered 5% on a car, or you can get this for 3% plus a $500 rebate. Which is the best deal?
Back
Who could
to
calculate
math.
that? Most people probably couldn't. It would take me a while too. Journalism literacy, I think I would have to emphasize the value of keeping an open mind. We'd probably take a current event and look at everything that's been reported on that current event and try to analyze it. Okay, why did they have this information? Why did they emphasize this? You know, I think to compare the various media and what they are reporting about something. And probably wouldn't hurt also maybe to take them to a public meeting and just let them observe for themselves, you know, what happens, then go back and talk about, okay, what happened? Yeah. What was most important? Why
if you had to report it, if you had to tell other people, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think those kinds of things, and yeah, I think it would benefit everybody. I think everybody needs a communication course. Maybe not necessarily journalism, though I'd argue wouldn't hurt them.
Well, I mean, my argument would be, if based on what I've heard you say, if our democracy is directly, dependent upon transparency and knowing what's going on and being able to judge for yourself, being able to then judge the data that's made available.
Absolutely. And I'll have to admit myself, I've got some bias when it comes to that, so I have to look closely at the candidates. The mayor's race in Campbellsville, I forget how many people were running, 5, 6, 7, 8, 20, I don't know, it's a whole lot of people. Some of them I can automatically already eliminate. The others, I'm going to have to spend some time studying them to determine who I would really vote for. Now, other offices, maybe not quite as much. Maybe somebody's got a track record. I've already made the decision based on that record, but then I really ought to know something about the other person too. Yeah. They could be worse than what I perceive this person to be. You know, sometimes we get what we deserve because we don't take the time to check it out.
Well, if we're lazy.
If we're lazy and don't check it out. Yeah. And if you believe everything a politician tells you, I've got some property I'd love to sell you at a great price.
From someone who holds office.
Yes.
So.
Oh, yeah.
An
absolutely.
Insider, maybe, at least at some level.
Well, I have always voted for what I believe to be correct. I actually was at a meeting once where it came somebody's time to vote. He says, well, come to me last. I'm waiting to see what they say. And I'm thinking, you've got to have the other people vote before you can make up your own mind. I have been the only person to vote no on something because I truly thought it wasn't in the best interest. And that's me. If I'm ever on a committee or whatever, you better want my opinion because you're going to get it. If you want me to rubber stamp something, you don't want me on your committee. You just don't. I believe greatly in freedom of speech, freedom of press, and I'm going to voice what I think. And I think that's every individual's right. But hopefully that opinion's based on some fact. Yeah. You got to have facts to back it up. You've got to.
In closing on the journalism piece of it, is there anything that you think the audience should know that you feel important besides what we've already covered today?
Well, journalism is under a challenge today. There's no question about that. The whole concept of fake news and all that, part of that I think is just politicians who want to divert attention from themselves to the press. They want to make the press the enemy. The press is not the enemy. And let me say that again. The press is not the enemy. The press exists to tell you what's happening. Now, sometimes you may not want to know. You may rather bury your head in the sand. They're to tell you what life is really like, and it's not all roses. It's not all roses and puppies and kittens. Yeah. It's just not. But if something's wrong, how can we change it if we don't know it's wrong to begin with? We can't do that. So sometimes, and that's one of the things about free speech too, a lot of people sometimes don't want to know anything negative. They just don't want. They want everything to reinforce what they already believe. Books, newspapers, television should challenge us. There's a real issue today with books being banned. Yeah. The government should not ban any books. What government's going to become better if books are banned? No government's going to become better. It's not. And what are they afraid of? That we will actually have an independent thought?
Yeah.
We depend on independent thought.
Yeah. And that brings us to the topic of free speech, I think, as a great segue.
Yes.
What is free speech? Help me understand when people say freedom of speech. And I know that I have a mug and a T-shirt probably.
Yes, that has the First Amendment on it. Well, free speech is guaranteed under the First Amendment. The First Amendment primarily protects us from government intervention. Now, do we have free speech in the workplace, et cetera, et cetera? You better put a big asterisk next to that. Can you go up to your boss and tell your boss what you think of your boss? You probably can, but you could suffer the consequences from it too. Can I say what I want to about the mayor? Yes, I can, and that's protected by the First Amendment. So a lot of people also tend to think that free speech...
Whether you're a journalist or not, you can...
Right. Absolutely, and I think that's one of the beauties of it too. Who's a journalist is not defined anywhere. We technically are all journalists. And that's one of the positive things about social media. We can report anything we want to. It's just I think we have to be responsible enough only to report something that's true, that's factual. People do lie, though, unfortunately. That's the big problem. Government free speech, we have the right to criticize government. That's one of the fundamental rights. That right has been defined in several court cases over the years. New York Times versus Sullivan is one that also identified actual malice. If a public official feels they've been harmed in some way, and maybe something said about them isn't true, but it was an honest mistake. We all make mistakes. Right. Recent court case that was just resolved involved Sarah Palin. The case involved something about some maps, congressional districts she published or whatever, that had crosshairs drawn on them. And the New York Times implied that in one of those districts, one of our congressmen was shot. Turns that was erroneous. As soon as they found out it was erroneous, they immediately corrected it. They shouldn't have made the mistake in the first place. It was embarrassing, it was sloppy reporting, but was it actual malice? For a public official to prove actual malice, it must be a reckless disregard. They must prove intent. Mm-hmm. The judge determined that she could not prove it. The jury determined she could not prove it. She's vowed, however, to appeal. Now, it's a good victory for the press, and I understand that public officials sometimes are embarrassed and have things said about them that's not true. I'm a public official. That goes with the job. It just goes with the job. The right to criticize government is fundamental. It is.
And criticize could just be personal, not factual.
Sure. Oh,
I don't like your
absolutely.
decisions, and
Sure.
I don't like you.
Right. That can happen.
Freedom of speech, right?
Right, exactly. It's freedom of speech. And it doesn't get to the point that it's actually actionable in court unless it's actual malice. Now, a private citizen doesn't have to prove actual malice. You just have to prove your reputation was ruined and it was false. You got to prove it's false. If it's true, forget it. You can say anything you want to about another person as long as it's true. If they don't like it, I'm sorry.
Right.
What was the old saying? If you can't do the time, don't do the crime, or whatever. Yeah. But the New York Times was out millions of dollars defending that. Had it been successful, one of the big problems would be small media that can't afford to spend thousands and thousands of dollars defending themselves for something that clearly is not actual malice.
So what I hear you saying is sometimes mistakes are made.
Yeah.
And not with the intent of...
I'm willing to bet you've made a mistake, and I know I've made some. Anybody tells you they've never made a mistake is a liar.
Ask my students in some of the grading.
Make mistakes.
Oops.
I won't go there.
They only tell me about when I do, give them a 10 instead of 1,000 or something.
Right.
Add an extra zero. I only hear about the bad ones.
Sometimes they're honest mistakes. Yeah.
Do you think that free speech, well, let me rephrase this. Is free speech an absolute right?
No, far from it. You don't have the right, for example, to go in a crowded movie theater and yell fire when there is no fire. You don't have the right to do that.
Like a false alarm, essentially.
Exactly, a false alarm. So there are limitations. If your speech causes harm and it's false, yeah, you got a problem. And like I said, the First Amendment protects you from government censorship, not individual. You know, we both work for the university. If the university decided we said something we shouldn't have, they have every right to be upset.
Especially if you've signed a code of conduct.
Sure, well, absolutely. And I guarantee you there's some things I might think, but I would never say to my wife. You know, common sense tells you not to do that.
If you want to live a little longer, you'll just
exactly.
bite your tongue
And
on
I'm
that
joking, okay? I better try to get myself out of that one. No, it is not absolute. When it comes to the government, though, it pretty much is absolute, as long as it doesn't amount to malice, that you're doing it intentionally and you know it's false to begin with. If you're doing it just to ruin somebody's life, and it's false, and you know it's false, that's another issue. But no, it's you can pretty much tell a government official anything you want to, and I think that's great. And actually, there's a quote here from John Stuart Mill, okay? He was a disciple of John Milton. Milton believed in the self-writing process, that everybody who has something to say should be free to say it. Yeah, there are going to be a lot of lies. There's going to be a lot of garbage out there, but the truth ultimately will come to the top. You know, just like cream, it's going to rise. I'm not sure I completely agree with that, especially if the stuff you see on Facebook. Will the truth ever come out on Facebook? I don't know. But here's what Emil said. If all mankind minus one were of one opinion, and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind. One person may have the only truth there is. But if that one person's forced to be quiet because nobody else believes the truth is lost. We should hear all opinions. But then it depends on us being rational and able to use reason to decide what's true. That's the problem. Do those who go on Facebook use common sense and rational behavior when they post something? You can answer that for yourself.
Yeah. Well, we coming back to truth and rationality, and as we've already mentioned, that's hard work sometimes.
Oh, it is hard work.
And it's especially hard work if what appears to be true differs from what you want to be true.
Right.
Which that's even harder truth.
Yeah, because we have certain things set in our heads that we believe to be true, and we don't like challenges to that.
Yeah.
We just don't, because it is work, it challenges us, it leads to some stress, if you will. I guess it's more comfortable to be ignorant. That's one way of putting it.
That's one way of putting it, absolutely.
It just, ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, and
do you want to be bliss all your life?
Well, and that's what I hear is from you, the challenge.
It is the challenge.
And if, as I try to put all this together, we're blessed to live in this country.
We are.
At the same time, we have some responsibility to that. And that responsibility lies in getting the right people to govern us. And that means that we have to do the hard work and put the due diligence into selecting. And it seems like perhaps sometimes we get into whether we like a person or not versus whether what they intend to do, if we can ever even get down to what they intend to do.
Yeah.
So that part, and that's where journalism, I think, is, and hearing what you're saying is not only helping us to make decisions, but keeping them honest.
Right. Oh, absolutely. We have to keep them honest. How many other countries would love to have the system we have? How many of them have died trying to get that system? How many Americans have died to get the system that we have? Yeah. My father fought in World War II, and I love watching World War II movies. And if you read much about that, the sacrifices that were made, 18, 19-year-olds, some were 17, lied about their age. They gave all they could give so that we have the right to search through this information and make intelligent decisions. And I think it's almost a slap in their face if we don't do that. Wow. Just because we like a person doesn't mean we should trust them. There are all kinds of people.
Or that they're the right person for the job.
Right. There are a lot of people out there that could sell you the Brooklyn Bridge or snake oil or, whatever. And there's a lot of people I don't trust. And maybe I'm too cynical sometimes. Oh. But if you want to really...
There's a lot of that going around these days.
Well, a little bit of it maybe is healthy, a little bit. But, if you want to lose my trust, lie to me one time. Lie to me one time. That's it.
Yeah, well, there's a saying, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you, sort of
exactly,
thing.
And that's true. People lie. I mean, it's that simple. They do. People who are interested more in profit than doing a good job for the country, they exist. There are plenty of them. Somebody asked me once how we could get better elected officials into a certain part of government. I'm not going to say which part of government. My answer is very simple: reduce their salaries. And why would I say that? Because then they're running to serve, not to put money in their pockets.
Yeah. Interesting.
I really believe that.
Be interesting to see how that worked out.
Well, I've often...
It's a nice change. Try something, right?
Hey, I've often thought, have computers select our officials. Could a computer do, and it's just random like they do jury duty. Well, congratulations, you're President of the United States. Could it be any worse sometimes?
Yeah.
I have to wonder.
I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier. You were talking about social media and Facebook as a platform in general. Do you think that number one, I guess my question being, everything's covered under free speech? I mean, any memes, like, can't we put a cap on cat memes, or, is all free speech in any form of communication covered?
Well, Facebook is a private company, so Facebook can censor Facebook.
I see.
Okay. Now, there have been questions about that lately, and there have been government hearings about controlling what's posted on Facebook. That's extremely difficult to do because, as I said, it is a private company. Media are privately owned, so you really can't force them to publish or broadcast something that they don't want to do it. They just can't. So
if there's a bias, and as you say, all of us have biases. It's a privately owned, which we can consume or not.
Right, exactly. That's up to us.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've often told people this: if you watch something on TV and you don't like it, turn the channel. Turn the channel. That's all you have to do. Because
we still have free will or choice. Yeah.
I hope we still have free will.
Last time we checked, right?
Yeah, sometimes I wonder about that. That's one of the problems, But you're going to have the truth police out there that reviews everything. Oh, this is true, this is not true.
But we're so embedded, we're so enmeshed in these media, these social media, and even picking the sites we want to go to, right, because we prefer maybe the way they report the stories, or maybe their own bias.
Right, or because it agrees with what we already think,
right,
and it reinforces what we already think. That's the issue. I can only tell you that as a journalist, I believe a journalist has to be as objective as possible. Does that mean that somebody might censor me? A newspaper that I work for could censor me, said, no, we're not publishing that. We're not going to do that. That's their right. I could go out and start my own, I suppose, if I had the money and wanted to, risk my livelihood doing that. Now, can I go to public meeting is a little more complicated. Can I stand on the street corner in a public space and speak my mind? Yes, I can. I can do that. That's, I hope, is never taken away from us. But if somebody comes there and records it and puts it on Facebook, can they pick what they broadcast and leave out? Yes, they can. The problem is if you regulate that, who's going to do the regulation? Who do you trust to decide? That's why we must decide.
Yeah.
We've got to look at all of it and make up our own minds.
Do you think there's some accountability towards maybe asking for more balance or fair? Or I'm having trouble with what I want to ask, because I guess what I really want to ask is the journalism versus an opinion piece.
Right.
Is there any place for making the journalism more accountable? Not a specific journalist, but journalism, like, hey, here's your core values.
I think that has to be done through ethical principles. It has to be done through whoever owns the media. Society of Professional Journalists has several standards for journalists. There was a commission, forget the exact name of it, several years ago that studied media and what needed to be done. I think that commission probably needs to be reformed and take a look to see what can be done. The simple fact is, the way the laws exist, and I can't think of any better way, if you own a media, you can put anything on there you want to.
Yeah.
And it can be a lie, and you know it's a lie. As long as it doesn't hurt someone and fall into the category of libel, then you can, opinions are opinions, and that's something that I think we need to realize. Just because it's opinion doesn't make it true. If I go to a fast food place and I spend $5 for a meal, okay, I think that's reasonable. If I spend $10 for a meal at a fast food restaurant, is that a good price or a bad price?
Well, I guess your expectations.
Right.
There's,
and it can vary.
Well, anymore with inflation.
Right.
but I get. Yeah.
It's all subjective. Yeah. It really is. But I get back to, who's going to decide? Who's going to regulate that and say, we can allow this, but we can't allow that? That's censorship.
So a question I had, but I think I might know the answer here, is, should we, we're talking 200 and some, 50 years later, something like that, or, should we reconsider what we believe the Founding Fathers had in mind? Is it time to reconsider it, freshen it up a little bit?
I don't know. I would be scared about that. My question is, who's going to do that? Do you let the government do that?
Yeah.
That's kind of like the fox watching the hens,
Yeah.
That's the difficult thing about it.
Do you think that there's some things that might be tweaked, or
absolutely. But I think journalists need to do that themselves. Journalists self-regulate. They need to realize, here's some stuff that's happened that shouldn't have happened. How can we do a better job? I also think journalists don't do a very good job of explaining themselves. Why did we do that? Why did we take this stance? Why did we report that? We don't do that.
What do you think that is?
I don't know. I really don't know. I can tell you, the last paper I worked for, I wrote a regular column called Between the Lines, and I tried to explain, here's a story we just covered, here's what we wrote, here's why. I think that more of that needs to be done, absolutely. I'm on the board of directors of the Kentucky Press Association. We had a meeting recently. There's always some kind of bill before the General Assembly trying to regulate papers of some sort. And they were talking about, well, we need to run something telling people how important newspapers are to you. I said, that's great, but don't just say newspapers are important to you. Give us an example. Did you know this happened in your community? If it hadn't been for your local paper, you wouldn't have known that. Yeah. And there are a lot of things that I think we do know because the press told us.
And I think that we know a lot more about what's going on even in Ukraine than we know what's going on in Campbellsville.
That's true.
Because we've lost that community connection.
We have lost that community connection. Newspapers have become smaller. Local paper used to be twice a week. It's now once a week. Economics is a big role in that. There have actually been a few government officials who've realized that's a problem. Well, what can we do? Well, you don't want government to fund the press, because then you got the conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Whoever can come up with the solution to this is going to become a hero in the media industry and probably make lots of money too. I don't have the answer.
Yeah.
I just know right now we don't need a lot of regulation, but I think it's up to journalists to police themselves. They've got to believe in them that it is a noble duty. It is something that we have to be very responsible with. And if we're not responsible enough, the government may step in sometime.
And would you say that journalists in particular, who probably do know this, but I mean, the freedom of speech is for everyone.
Right.
But they're sort of the gatekeepers.
Oh, yeah.
And,
absolutely.
And if
sure.
If they misuse or for nefarious, and I don't mean that maybe the tone of that, but if it's misused and things get, I guess I envision that at some point the trust is just not there all the way around.
Right.
And as the gatekeepers now to that transparency, to that truth you were talking about,
right,
we all are going to be in a bad place.
Right. We will all suffer because of that. And you're right, gatekeeping is an important function of the media. But think about this. A school board meeting could last 4 hours. Okay? You could broadcast that live. You go to cover it for radio, you're going to broadcast maybe 30 seconds of what happened. Right. You're going to write maybe one, maybe two stories. Can you include everything that happened in 4 hours and 30 seconds? Can't be done. Can you do it in one story? Can't be done. So the person doing it has to be a gatekeeper and decide what's important enough to pass on. Now, the solution is simple. Require all of the public to go to all these meetings, right? Yeah. Never going to happen. It's never going to happen. So, yeah, we are gatekeepers. Yeah. We determine what's important that the public needs to know. And hopefully we do a good enough job that we satisfy their need for information and it's trustworthy.
Is there anything that we can do just as the public
sure.
to scrutinize that or to put more
sure.
make them accountable? When I say them, journalists.
Complain, write letters to the editors. If you think somebody did a good job, tell them that. If you think, well, I don't know why you didn't cover this. I thought this was important. No, why didn't you cover that? Send them a letter, ask them, call them up. Yes, I think so.
Again, getting back to putting some work into it.
Absolutely. We can't just sit there like an empty vessel and have no desire to take anything in whatsoever. The information, for the most part, is there. At one time, all of these city council meetings were broadcast live on the internet. I don't know if they still are, but I don't expect anybody to tune into that. It's just not going to happen. Probably the largest crowd we ever had, maybe 7,500 people. And if you think about out of the city of Campbellsville, that's not a lot of people. Yeah. That's when we were considering a ban on smoking in public. That's what got the people out.
Brought them out, huh?
It really brought them out. Yeah. I was called a tobacco Nazi, too. That's
maybe not the worst thing you've been called, but
that's true. That's feedback. And if somebody wants to think that's fine. And I might just add, I don't care if you smoke, just don't do it around me.
Yeah.
Is that asking too much? I don't think it is.
Yeah.
Respect others.
Is there anything that you want to add about freedom of speech or journalism? I've got one other question, but I sort of wanted to just make sure that if there's anything that you want to help me understand.
Let me tell my John Boy Walton story. Okay,
the Waltons now.
If you remember the Waltons.
Some of y'all might have to do some research on that one.
That goes back a few years. The good people of Waltons Mountain had read that the German people were gathering all the books they could find that were written in English, and they were burning these books. They were horrified. So they decided to find all the books in Waltons Mountain written in German. I don't know how many that would be, but I remember from the TV show, it was a whole bunch of them. I had to wonder how many Germans were there.
Right.
John Boy's upset because if you know the program, John Boy enjoyed learning, he enjoyed writing, he enjoyed the book, thought the books were valuable. He's very upset. He reaches into the fire and pulls a book out, okay? Happens to be a man there who can read German, speak German. Handed it to him and said, could you read the first paragraph in this book? He did in German. He said, could you read it in English now? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And all the people went, what have we done?
Yeah.
What have we done? And sometimes we make decisions without all the facts. We need the facts. Journalists exist to give you the facts. Now, what you do with them is up to you.
Yeah. Interesting. One last question. How do you think artificial intelligence is going to change journalism and/or free speech?
Oh, gosh. I don't know. And it depends, I guess, on how far we go with artificial intelligence. It really does. It's a brave new world. There's no question about it. I don't know. Can you be a little more specific about what exactly you mean about artificial intelligence?
Well, in terms of artificial intelligence being able to make decisions like a human? Could you see an AI agent that was a journalist?
No.
Why?
Because you've got to take all the information and you've got to sort through it, and depending on your knowledge of the audience, determine what's most important for them. And then you've got to be able to find other facts to go along with that and to express it in terms that people care about and can relate to. That would be hard to do. Could it ever be that?
Sort of the human context, right?
Yeah,
you have to
right,
put it all
the human
within
context. And I think that's what journalism and communications does. It keeps the human part of us human. Now, will artificial intelligence get to the point, if I remember from 1984, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, didn't they on the assembly line, when we're still in the embryo stage, they determined what you were going to be?
Right, the
biotech
so
it's
stuff,
programmed, exactly. So could we have chips put in our brains when we're young?
Elon Musk thinks so.
Okay. You know, I actually mentioned chips in a class once. I was talking about, you know, all the scanners grocery stores have, and you got to have the card to get the discount. And I'm thinking, why don't they just put a tattoo on us or a chip in us so we don't have to worry about it? We just scan it. I guarantee there are plenty of people who want to do that. But I had somebody after class say, do you know so-and-so? Yeah, he has a chip in him. It's because in his home country there are so many kidnappings, he has a chip in him to track him.
I got you.
So that stuff is becoming more and more, common, and our reliance on smartphones, computers, etc. What's going to happen? I'll ask you this question, Thomas. What's going to happen when all the computers go down? Like they did at Taylor Regional Hospital. All their computers were out, all their phones were out. The last time it happened, I actually showed up for a doctor's appointment. They said, we can't see you. I said, why not? I'm just standing right here in front of you.
Yeah.
Well, we don't have you in our system. We can't do anything. I remember going to the doctor when they didn't have computers.
Right.
Are we too dependent on this stuff?
Well, it's definitely a reliance that we are really comfortable with. And from the research that I've been doing, and in particular, most recently about marketing, the idea that the computer, would go down and then what? I think that that's one argument, but it stays up a lot. It stays up a whole lot, 24/7.
Right.
365 time, however long, right? I think the biggest challenge is going to be, can we unplug it?
Yeah.
Not will it go down accidentally, for some other reason, but will there come a point when it's too big to be unplugged?
Yeah, we can get into Terminator stuff there when they decide that they don't need us.
Yeah.
And do they need us?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So those are definitely some big.
Yeah, I want to keep the human touch in there.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, I think that's one of the things that is really important, that we maybe even learn how to stay connected.
Right.
Relearn
That's true.
or
that is
just
true.
find that space where we connect to each other and connect to the planet. And I don't mean in an emotional, abstract way.
Right.
caring for the planet, but yet I never touch anything other than concrete and steel, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right. But and connecting to each other, and I don't mean through a mediated, device.
Right.
And even connecting to something higher and greater. So yeah, I think that those are the things that their science fiction would maybe show a different. But where we are right now, I think it's important to ground ourselves, for lack of a better word.
It is, absolutely.
In those things.
Right, and I think a good journalist has to be grounded, and I think a good journalist has to care about people. They have to.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for being on.
You're very welcome.
And really, and giving me a lot of things to think about and helping me really understand that profession a bit more, and my responsibility. I wouldn't have guessed that before this conversation. So I really and I did want to congratulate you on this beautiful space. The WLCU studios are here, the academic space.
Right.
Basically, we talked a little bit about your awards earlier, but maybe this is that feather that
it's a fantastic building. It's something we've needed for a long time. Academia has gone through a lot of change to COVID and all that stuff, but I hope this is just the beginning of the future. I am retiring later this year for a whole lot of reasons. I am 69 years old. A lot of people might say I should have done it 10 years ago.
Or maybe you still have a lot left in you.
I've got a little left in me, but I sometimes...
So go do some other things. Get back to journal. Write a book. There's lots of things you can...
I might do that. I have a feeling my wife wants me to
catch up on your Netflix series.
There you go.
Well, again, thank you so much,
Sure.
and
again,
congratulations and on all of your achievements.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your time.
Sure.
And thank you for joining us here on Help Me Understand. And on that, I'm going to sign off by saying good night, John Boy.
Good night, Mary Ellen.